Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. Thank you, everyone, for coming in from what is probably a beautiful evening wherever you are in Oregon tonight and learning about Oregon Coast Snowy Plover Network from the North Coast to the South Coast of Oregon. My name is Jessie Jones, and I am the CoastWatch Volunteer Coordinator. I work for a program called Oregon Shores, or organization called Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. Oregon Shores has been around for about 51 years, working to protect access to the Oregon coast and working to keep the Oregon coast healthy. If you have more information about Oregon Shores, you can email me. CoastWatch is a mile-by-mile beach adoption program in Oregon, from Fort Stevens on the north coast all the way down to Crissy Field on the south coast. The idea is that volunteers adopt a mile of the Oregon coast. They walk that mile as often as they can. We ask for 4 times a year, but many volunteers do it once a month. They look for changes, both natural and human caused. They look for all kinds of things and file reports on our website. I do a lot of work connecting our volunteers with beach rangers and with researchers and scientists to dive a little bit deeper if they would like to do some community science monitoring, surveying, that kind of thing. So if you have other questions about that, you can contact me, but we're going to just get right into our program this evening. So Oregon Shores and myself had an idea that as the snowy plovers are hatching along the Oregon coast, that we would bring to you a program of the people along the Oregon coast who are working together to protect these birds and to manage the areas where they are. And it's quite a wide network, and I'm very happy to have a number of women here tonight who are and have been involved for a number of years with Oregon coast snowy plovers. So I'm going to introduce everyone who is here this evening, and I'm going to start by saying that Laurel Hillman, who is not here with us, but she's a very important part of this network, so I'm going to introduce her first. Laurel is the Ocean Shores Resource Coordinator, and she works with the Oregon State Parks and Rec, and she is the coast-wide coordinator for the Habitat Conservation Plan, which is the coordinated planning document developed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for all the snowy plover sites along the coast. This includes habitat restoration and management, signage interpretation, enforcement, predator control, and monitoring. OPRD manages all of the sites, or maybe this network does. We're going to learn a little bit more about this. And there is a map that will be shared a number of times tonight for all of you to see. And they work in partnership with federal agencies for the sites that are federal-owned uplands. And Oregon State Parks has responsibility for the wet sand adjacent to federal lands for enforcement. And then through a partnership with Oregon Parks and Rec Department, Portland Audubon helps with the biological monitoring and outreach pieces on the North Coast. So we're going to talk more about that tonight. So the first person who will be speaking tonight, I'm just going to introduce everyone and then we'll just kind of go into it. And panelists, you can keep your cameras on or off while someone is speaking. So our first guest tonight is Cheryl Strong. Cheryl Strong will be giving kind of an overview of snowy plovers on the coast. Cheryl is a fish and wildlife biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She's based in Newport. She has been a wildlife biologist for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 15 years and is the lead Western snowy plover biologist for Oregon. She's stationed in Newport, as I said, and focuses her efforts on wide-ranging, complex, sometimes controversial and sensitive conservation issues throughout the Oregon coast. After Cheryl will be Eleanor Gaines. She'll be kind of giving an overview of the science. She's the director of the Oregon Biodiversity Information Center of the Institute for Natural Resources at Portland State University. And she has coordinated snowy plover monitoring along the central and southern Oregon coast for many years. Her PhD research examined the effects of management on Oregon snowy plovers' productivity and population growth. After her, we welcome Cynthia Burns, who will be talking about signage, strategy, restrictions, and she'll also be talking a little bit about volunteers as well. Cindy is a wildlife biologist with the Forest Service. She has worked with U.S. Forest Service for 34 years and holds a bachelor degree from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point in wildlife management and biology. She is the Siuslaw National Forest coordinator for the Western Snowy Plover Recovery Program and oversees fore-dune habitat restoration, volunteer beach monitoring, and snowy plover nest monitoring. So you will hear more from her. And then finally, Allison Anholt, who is the Coastal Community Science Biologist at Portland Audubon, will be talking about the North Coast Plover Patrol, among other things. Allison is from the Pacific Northwest and has worked with wildlife conservation and community science in the Aleutian Islands, the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Florida Everglades, and Cape May, New Jersey. She'll be speaking about a number of things as well. So welcome, everyone. We are going to, I think, hold the questions until the very end of tonight's program. But if you have something burning and we do have time in between, we can have this be somewhat flexible. Please put your question in the chat. You can also do Q&A. And then if you want to speak at the end and ask a question that way, I can unmute you, but I think we'll wait till the end for those. All right. So our first guest again is Cheryl Strong. And Cheryl, I don't think you have a screen to share, so I won't stop sharing yet. But okay.
Good, great. Thank you, Jessie. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everybody on this evening. So I'm going to give kind of an overview of plovers in Oregon and talk about Fish and Wildlife Service sort of perspective a little bit. Plovers were listed in 1993 and they range from southern Washington down to southern California. Back in 1993 or so, they only nested in about 6 locations in Oregon, and there were about 30 birds back then. There was a recovery plan written, which is the Fish and Wildlife Service sort of plan of attack that talks about how to get plovers off the recovery or off the endangered species list. And that recovery plan called for 250 Western snowy plovers in Recovery Unit 1. And Recovery Unit 1 covers Oregon as well as the very southern part of Washington. So 250 birds was called for Recovery Unit 1, and I am happy to say that we have well exceeded that number since about 2015. Our highest estimate of breeding birds in Oregon was about 613 birds in 2021. So Western snowy plovers in Oregon are doing very well at this point. We definitely have some years where they do better than others, and this is one of those years where they are doing better than others. But in the big picture of things, plovers are doing very well. This is really in large part due to partnerships with federal agencies, state agencies, as well as Portland Audubon and Eleanor works for. We have a pretty large plover management team, and it's just a very cohesive group, and it's sort of my job to coordinate this team, and they're just a pleasure to work with. It's been a very collaborative effort that has gone on to help recover this species in Oregon. And I also, as Jessie mentioned, the Habitat Conservation Plan, which was written with the state of Oregon, who manages almost all the beaches in the state of Oregon, that Habitat Conservation Plan really set the stage for being able to increase numbers of birds on the coast. They had as well, you know, that it laid out what the state was going to do. And then we had some really good buy-in from the public for the most part too. So I really credit the public and using the beaches on the state of Oregon for being willing and able to follow along some of the rules that are put in place to safeguard these birds that nest on the beach. And I really want to point to Lincoln County volunteers at this point too. We have no managed beaches for plovers in Lincoln County here around Newport, but we do have nesting birds in Lincoln County. And so we have a very dedicated group of volunteers who goes out a couple times a week, rain or shine, wind or elsewhere or not. And they do a really great job. And I think a couple of them are on this call tonight. So I just want to say thank you to them because they really put their heart into this. And it's really great to see. And so that's my good news. And I'm going to let Eleanor, I think, take over now.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'm going to share my screen, so that'll just take a second. Oh, there we go. Is everybody seeing my screen?
It looks great. It looks great.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and great to follow along with what Cheryl was talking about. And I will go through my presentation. Parts of it I might kind of fly through because I think it might be old news for many of the people on this call, but I don't want to leave any important bits out. So before I get started, I thought I'd just tell you who I'm with, because it seems like nobody's ever heard of us. We're Oregon Biodiversity Information Center. We're housed at Portland State University. We are part of the Institute for Natural Resources, and our goals are to make natural resources information available so that good management decisions can be made. We're, for folks who maybe come from somewhere else, we are Oregon's Heritage Program. We're members of the NatureServe Network. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out what's rare and where it's at and what we can do to make it less rare. And then, so I'll just move on. As Cheryl said, snowy plovers historically occurred from up on Long Beach Peninsula all the way down to the Baja in California, Baja California. And they were probably, before people were using the beach quite so intensively, they were probably pretty well dispersed, but they were all up and down the sandy beaches in Oregon. And by the 1970s, the snowy plovers had almost disappeared from the state. And as Cheryl said, by the 90s, there were fewer than 50 birds along the Oregon coast. So they were listed by the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And in Oregon, we developed a snowy plover working team where agencies got together and worked cooperatively to manage the birds. So just a little bit of background on them in case you are less familiar than some about this bird. They're adapted to these open ephemeral environments, so the dunes, which are constantly shifting, and they rely on camouflage and early detection of predators to survive. So they like to be in wide open places where they can see threats coming from far away. They are short distance migrants, so they do move around a little bit in the winter, but generally they're in Oregon year round, although they might move around during the winter. They eat invertebrates, and the average lifespan is just under 3 years, but we have quite a few birds that live longer than 10 years. I think our record holder is 16 years. So a few birds live a really long time, but most of them live fewer than 3 years. And so for a bird, that's pretty long lived. They lay 3 eggs just right there on the sand. They're just a little divot in the sand is their nest. Both parents share incubation, and that lasts about a month. And then the chicks are what we call precocial, which means they're cute, right? They're not like robin chicks or something that are naked and scrawny looking. They're fluffy, their eyes are open, they're running around within a few hours of hatching. But they need parents to keep them warm and lead them to food and protect them from predators. So as I said, both parents incubate, but the female, after the nest hatches, the female usually leaves and tries to get another nest started with another male. That's kind of unusual in the bird world. We call that serial polyandry, and it allows the female to maximize her reproductive output. The other thing that's interesting about snowy plovers is that they're really faithful to a place where they have successfully nested. So if a nest hatches, the birds are going to come back in subsequent years and nest in that same area. If if they have several nest failures, they'll probably try someplace else. What's maybe not so great is that they'll come back to a site even if the nest hatches but the chicks fail. So they don't pay attention to whether or not they're actually producing chicks or fledglings, but we kind of work with that. So they come back to the places where their nests hatched, but not necessarily to where chicks have fledged. Let's see. So we say that plover management is like a three-legged stool. They're threatened by habitat loss, increasing predation, and human disturbance. And these three are all interrelated. So, you know, the classic habitat problem along the Oregon coast is invasive vegetation like European beach grass or gorse. And not only does that remove habitat for plovers, but it gives predators a place to hide. And then we have increasing predator populations on the coast, especially predators that do well with humans, like crows or skunks, things like that. And then human disturbance. We have increasing use of the beach. We all want to be on the beach. And in Oregon, really, the plovers have it pretty good compared to, like, if you've been to the beaches in California, those birds, it's a pretty tough place to raise chicks. So these are the sites that Orbic monitors plovers at along the coast. So you can see it's just a small piece of the Oregon coast, but these are the what we call our core sites. So these are the places that the plovers have been reliably for many years, and there's management happening at these sites. So it's important because the agencies are expending a lot of effort and funds to manage plovers. It's important for them to know how that's going, what effect it's having. And so at these places, Orbic does what we call intensive monitoring. Let's see. So since 1990, 35 biologists have participated in snowy plover monitoring along the Oregon coast. And like the birds that they study, many of them return to the project year after year. This is our Central Coast crew. It's Daniel Farrar and Mary Lee. And Daniel has been with us well over 10 years now. And I think this is Mary's second or third year. But they cover sites from Baker Beach and Sutton down to, which just north of Florence, down to 10 Mile, and all those points in between. And then this is our South Coast crew. They're based in Bandon. This is David Loughton and Kathy Castelline. They have been working on this project, monitoring plovers on the South Oregon coast, for over 25 years. So amazing knowledge there. And And here it looks like they are banding some chicks. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And you can see, you know, I think sometimes people think, oh, they're walking the beach every day. What a great gig. It's cold sometimes, it's windy, it's rainy. They look pretty chilly there right now to me, but they are very dedicated, and we would not be able to do this work without their expertise. So the monitors locate nests. They have, some of you volunteers probably know, you really develop a search image and you get good at finding those nests. So they locate nests, they follow the nests to determine their fate. If it's depredated, they let us know what they believe the cause was. If it hatches, they attend the hatching and band the chicks. So we have a population that is largely color banded, which means we can identify individual groups of birds. And we do that so that we can determine productivity at each site and then survival between years. So, you know, when I said we had a bird that lived 16 years, we know that because that bird was banded and we're able to recite it year after year. And we know I'll be talking about how many chicks we fledge. We know that because those chicks are banded. If we didn't do the banding, we would not have as much information as we do. And so we've been able to document that this intensive management is working. Here we're showing the population trajectory just for the core sites. So this doesn't even include the North Coast sites or some of those other intervening sites like Cheryl was talking about Lincoln County. These numbers don't include that. So there's an annual breeding season winter survey, and that's that gray line here that many of you may have participated in. I usually go and survey Bay Ocean Spit every summer. And so the gray line includes all the window survey count data, Oregon coastwide. And then the darker line, the purplish line, shows the adults present just in our core breeding areas. So it's a little bit more because, of course, on the window survey, we miss birds. We don't always get them. But you can see that these numbers track each other pretty closely. And so what we've learned is that the management's been effective. This is a map of where snowy plovers were in the 1990s in Oregon when we first started this monitoring work. They weren't actually at all these sites because Overlook didn't exist, that was created, but these were kind of the core sites. And then, and this map is outdated now, but you get the idea. We have snowy plovers nesting in all the coastal counties in Oregon, and their numbers have increased. So we've not only grown the population, as we saw in that graph, but we've expanded the number of occupied areas, which is really great for population viability. This means that if something happens, say an oil spill or something at one site, we've got other sites that will maintain our population. And the monitoring work has really been important to be able to show all this. The other thing we look at is productivity. So how many chicks are fledged each year. The top line is the number of nests we found each year. And you can see that's grown, which you would expect because our population has grown. Some years it's a lot more than others. And then the lower line is the number of chicks that we know have fledged. Probably we don't catch all the fledglings, but you can see the trajectory is pretty good. As Cheryl said, we have good years and not so good years. And I think we're in the midst of a not so great year, but the general trajectory is pretty good. One thing that I think is kind of interesting in this graph is if we look towards the end, towards the right side of the graph, can you all see my cursor? Okay, so you can see we had a lot of nests, a really lot of nests in 2020, 2021, but we didn't have very many fledglings, and you would kind of expect them to track each other. What happened is nests were failing, nests repeatedly failed, and so the birds re-nested. That means we had more nests, and we just weren't, because those nests weren't hatching, we weren't getting fledglings. In general, we find that in most years, if we can get a nest to hatch, we can get the chicks to fledge. Sometimes the tricky part is getting them to hatch. So we've also been involved in doing some demography work to help managers target their work so that we can get the most bang for our conservation buck. And some of the questions we've been asking are, how can we most efficiently manage the population? We've looked at what life stage contributes most to population growth so that we can target our management on that life stage. And then also what management actions help the best. You know, if we have to let something go, what would make sense? What do we not want to let go? That kind of thing. So to do that, we've looked at each life stage. And when I say life stage, I mean these 4 stages. So nest survival is the probability that a nest will make it the 28, 29 days that it takes to hatch. And then chick survival is the probability that the chicks will make it the 29 days to fledging or independence, when they can feed themselves and take care of themselves. And then juvenile survival is the likelihood that a young bird will survive from the time it fledges until its first birthday, the next spring. And then adult survival is the annual survival every year after that. As part of our work, we've found that adult survival contributes most to population growth. So if you had to choose between doing something to benefit nests versus benefiting adults, you would want to put your energy towards adult survival. The problem there is it's a lot harder to do that because the adults move around and the nests don't. But at least we have that information. So I think that's most, yes. So we've, under the current management scenarios, our demography work is showing that we can expect the population to continue to increase with, you know, not just a straight line, but there'll be some bumps in the road. And then I just thought I'd share some fun stuff if folks would like. This is, if you look in the lower center of the screen, you can see an adult sitting on the nest, and we can just watch what happens. This nest hatches and the little chicks are running around. So you can kind of, this is what the monitors get to watch all the time. Very fun. I wish I could be out there doing that every day. Oops, that's not, I didn't want to do that. How do I? There we go. So that's everything I had. Maybe I'll pass it off to Cindy unless there's like immediate questions. I'll stop sharing.
It doesn't look like there's any immediate questions. So thank you so much, Eleanor. I love the video at the end. Thanks.
Okay, I will get my screen sharing going here, just a minute. Hello, everybody. This is great to be here tonight with you, and I am going to share just real quickly. There we go. A little overview of what I do with the U.S. Forest Service, Siuslaw National Forest. I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can see where our Forest Service sites are with the Forest Service shield. But I did want to say in the last few years, we have had nesting. Siuslaw is broken up into two different districts. We've got the Hebo district on the north coast, and this is where at Sand Lake, on the north spit of Sand Lake, we've recently had snowy plover nesting in the last couple of years, and it's just to the north of Oregon State Park's Sitka Sedge Natural Area. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that area where there is also plover nesting. So that's been an exciting development for Forest Service. And I won't dwell on where the other sites are, except to say North Jetty of the Umpqua is also a plover nesting area, but that is one that Oregon Biodiversity Information Center does not monitor. But we still try and keep track of what's going on there. Wanted to go through a little bit about our beach restrictions. This is one of the signs that you will commonly see up and down the coast at plover beaches. Our seasonal restrictions, if you don't know, are from March 15th to September 15th. And what activities are prohibited is vehicles of any kind, motorized or non-motorized, like bicycles, kites or drones, or any kind of aerial craft, and dogs are not allowed anywhere on occupied plover beaches, not even on a leash. A lot of folks remember the days, it's been over a decade, when we did allow dogs on a leash in front of plover beaches, but this is no longer since the Habitat Conservation Plan came online. And Oregon State Parks has on their website some great online maps of dog-friendly beaches that you can find, and also the Siuslaw National Forest Plover webpage also has links to these same maps, so you can find where you can take your dog with no restrictions. These recreational restrictions cover the whole foredune and the wet sand beach. And also it's not on the sign, but there's no camping or campfires on plover beaches. If you look down at the bottom of the sign, where did my cursor go? We ask that you stay on the wet sand with hiking and horseback riders. All right, well, hopefully this is the only situation in which you're going to see a beaver that's bigger than a bear, but I thought it was a fun way to illustrate that Forest Service and state parks work cooperatively together to do outreach, education, and enforcement of seasonal beach restrictions. We are both managing the same beaches, and our seasonal beach restrictions mirror each other. Oregon State Parks has beach rangers that patrol most of Oregon's beaches, and Forest Service has volunteer, seasonal, and permanent staff also patrolling the beach. Our beach restrictions for plover are covered under a special area closure that is signed off on by our forest supervisor and also our law enforcement staff. So that's State Parks is covered under the Habitat Conservation Plan. So it's already mentioned that the state has the jurisdiction below the high tide line when there's an upland. The federal government is the upland landowner. And what I wanted you to get from this slide is that the wet sand beach over on the left side is where we want people to walk, and it's below the last high tide. So wherever, usually you can see where the last high tide, like how high it went up on the beach. And we ask folks to stay below that rack line or tide line. And then on the dry sand, both inside and outside of the ropes is restricted during the nesting season. Now, sometimes unusual things can happen, like if there's a very high incoming tide or storm surge or something like that, it can be difficult to navigate, but most of the time there's plenty of wet sand to walk on. This is another sign that you might see, and notice that it's not on the beach proper. You can't see very well in this photo, but immediately behind this sign is Silk Goose Estuary, one of our plover nesting areas. But anyone that knows anything about plovers knows that they don't nest in the trees and shrubs, so this is kind of confusing and doesn't make sense. But we found that if we let people walk through the shrubs out to the open sand, and then they find a rope line, most people are going to continue just to walk through the nesting habitat to the beach instead of turning around and finding the nearest beach access. So that's why you might see a sign like this that's not actually in the open sand itself. Again, this is our symbolic fence line that probably most of you have seen out on our beaches. Some folks think it's a little bit problematic because the font is pretty small. You have to get close to it to read, but generally you can do that at a beach access. And then once you've read one sign, you know what all the rest of them say. So why do we have these beach restrictions? Eleanor touched on it, that human activities can cause different direct and indirect negative effects to plovers. For example, to plovers, a kite or a drone can seem like a predatory bird, like a hawk. Our dogs that we want to walk on the beach can seem like coyotes, which can depredate nests. Our human presence close to nesting areas can cause birds to leave the nest or leave their brood, making them vulnerable to predators, getting chilled by the cold wind, or actually eggs being buried in the blowing sand, and just disrupting feeding activities. And so especially chicks may become weakened if they can't find enough time to forage. Also, predators actually key in on the movement of plovers off the nest. So that's another great reason for staying on the wet sand. So the less the plovers are disturbed, it's all the better for them. Also, sometimes nests are found right near the rope line or outside of it even. And so that's another reason why we need to stay on the wet sand. Each year, the Siuslaw installs about 17 miles of symbolic fence. And in between putting it up and taking it down, we're constantly moving it westward as the beach builds over the summer and readjusting to constantly changing the beach environment. I-beams such as this one typically mark the end of motorized use areas. Again, motorized vehicles are prohibited at all times on occupied plover beaches. The exception is north and south of Spare Park Road, which is in Douglas County, just north of Reedsport and Gardner. There's two sections of beach where the wet sand portion, the state parks portion, is open to vehicles outside of the breeding season. But otherwise, all of our plover beaches are motorized use is excluded all year round. Habitat restoration. The forest has been involved in habitat restoration for plovers since the mid to late 90s. And basically this is removing beach grass, European beach grass. And primarily we have used mechanical means, like here with a bulldozer and excavator. And Other methods have included using hand pulling crews to pull beach grass resprouts after mechanical treatment. We've had a little bit of use of herbicide, and we've also in the past used spread cultured oyster shell on various on the habitat on the sand to provide hiding cover for plovers. We don't do this anymore, but it was great while we continued to do that. We did find that it sometimes brought in weeds that we didn't want, so that work was suspended. In 2020, the forest signed off on a dunes restoration plan, which allows for restoration of more foredune within snowy plover management areas than ever before. So we're really excited about that. Treatment methods still include mechanical, manual, prescribed burning, and herbicide, and are expected to be much more effective at eliminating beach grass cover. This spring, we were able to do a small prescribed burn on an area that we had sprayed with herbicide to be able to remove the grass thatch, and it was a huge success, and we had birds nesting there this spring. This winter, we were able to clear beach grass from about 15 acres of dune just north of the Taconich Spit. This is one of those areas. And we had over 24 nests in this area already this summer. We tried to moderate the slope of the beach to make it more accessible for plover use. And that's going to be kind of an ongoing project going forward. This was just kind of the first cut. And what was fun this year, as we were finishing up, we worked from the south end to the north. When we were doing the finishing up on the north end, we already had plovers building nest scrapes on the south end of this new newly cleared area. So that was kind of cool. This is an area that we did a few years ago. You can see the dozer tracks still in the back. We try really hard to mimic great plover nesting habitat. You can see a number of plovers in the foreground. And while our focus is to create great nesting habitat for plovers, we're also interested in kind of restoring the whole beach dune ecosystem, and this includes native plants. And we have encouraged recolonization by a number of native plants. This one's pink sand verbena. It's a state listed dune plant and sensitive for Forest Service. Gray beach pea, beach burr. This is yellow sand verbena, beach morning glory, and this is Honkenia peploides. Don't know what the common name is, but this is just some of the native plants that are coming into our plover nesting areas. It's been really exciting to see over the years. So how can you help? We're always up for beach cleanup. The winter is our primary time for beach cleanups, and even if you can't participate in an organized cleanup, you can still pick up trash anywhere on the beach at any time during the winter, I should say. We generally discourage picking up trash in the summer, but it's fine as long as you stay on the wet sand in front of plover beaches. And on the ODNRA, the Oregon dunes, sorry, if you collect so much that you can't get it back to your vehicle, we only ask that you tie the bag up, leave it at one of the numbered beach accesses, and don't leave any bags or floats or anything like that next to the symbolic fence. Even better yet, if you call us and let us know where you've left the bag, it helps us clean that up. We're in the early stages of planning a couple of different beach cleanups for the Oregon dunes this winter. So encourage you to keep a lookout for those opportunities to be advertised. Other things that I wanted to mention that you can do to help plovers and wildlife in general are, probably most of you are aware to be careful during snack time and mealtime that all the crumbs are picked up, and because human food attracts predators that can impact plovers and other wildlife, and keep wildlife wild by not feeding them. We also have volunteer opportunities on the forest. Not as many volunteer opportunities as maybe the North Coast, and our volunteers primarily are monitoring visitor compliance with recreational beach restrictions and doing education and outreach. We have 2 RV campsites in our Silk Goose corridor that is just south of Florence, but we don't require that volunteers have to live on site. So if you live near Forest Service lands and you want to volunteer somehow to help plovers, just give me a call or call one of our offices, and we'll see what we can work out. If you can't volunteer, you can at least spread the word about snowy plover recovery in Oregon. It's been quite the success story. Anyway, I wanted to thank all of our partners. It's through our partners, as was mentioned, that we have been so successful, and it makes our program strong. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I wanted to really quickly, before Allison comes on, to let everybody know that the chat is not working. It was disabled, I think, because of an update. So please put your questions in the Q&A. The Q&A is working. The chat's working for the host and panelists, but anyone who has questions after Allison, and then you can also raise your hand. Okay, thanks.
All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just want to share really briefly. I know we're running a little bit low on time, and I want to give everyone the opportunity for questions.
It's okay. We're good. You go ahead. Everybody's still here, which is great.
Yeah. So my name is Allison Anholt. I'm the Coastal Community Science Biologist at Portland Audubon. Portland Audubon has had a strong presence in the coast of Oregon, doing work for many, many years, since the beginning of Portland Audubon, in fact. But this is a really exciting kind of development that keeps growing every year that we'll talk more about into the Plover Patrol program here on the North Coast. This is kind of the theme of the evening is collaboration. We work with everyone here on this chat on the panel today. We work with everyone to collaborate about ways of plover monitoring, about methods, about different research strategies. And we work directly on Oregon State Parks land and managed beaches, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So we have several monitoring goals for the Plover program. So the Plover Patrol program is volunteer driven. That means that we have volunteers doing all the work that the biologists who've been doing it 10, 20 years down in the South and Central Coast have been doing. So we have volunteers doing all this work, which is super great. It's really intensive program, and the people who do it are really into it and have gotten really good at doing all of these things. So with volunteers at each snowy plover management area on the North Coast, and these snowy plover management areas are down here on the left-hand side. This is from Clatsop down to South Sand Lake Spit, also known as Sitka Sedge, down by Pacific City. So we're covering a large area in Clatsop and Tillamook counties where the plovers are nesting. So that includes all of these snowy plover management areas, as well as areas that don't have those additional management protections that Cindy talked about in her presentation, but the plovers don't listen to signage, so sometimes they choose to nest there anyway, and we monitor them at several other sites there as well. So at each of these snowy plover management areas and each of the ones that the plovers choose to nest onto, we want to find and document each plover on each site, and we want to do that at least once per week. We also want to record bands. So as we heard about in Eleanor's presentation, some of the birds are color banded down in these source populations in the South Coast, and a lot of them make their way up here. So when we find them, we want to document that, sometimes with awesome photographs. Some of the volunteers have fantastic photography equipment, which is a huge benefit to documenting bands. But we want to be able to document each plover as they're using these North Coast sites. This is particularly exciting because plovers haven't been on the North Coast since their endangered species listing a couple decades back. So as they start to recolonize and their population starts to grow, like you heard earlier, we want to be able to document that. And so we want to record every single bird we can possibly find out there. We also want to record and find every single nest that we can find out there as well. We do this by looking at tiny little plover tracks in the sand and following up to the eggs that we see there. Also at each snowy plover management area, we want to monitor each nest. We not only want to find them, we also want to figure out what their fate is. And by fate, I mean if the nests hatch, and if they do hatch, do those chicks fledge or become able to free fly on their own, independent of their parents. So we want to figure that out for each nest. And we do that by monitoring them about 2 times weekly until they hatch, and then monitoring each chick until they fledge. Importantly, we want to do all of this without harming the birds. We don't want to add additional pressure, human disturbance. We don't want to bring or attract predators into the area. We want to do this responsibly, but also to get this important data and information about how they're using the North Coast in recent years. As we learned, this is hard. The beaches are not exactly favorable weather for a large part of the season. The nest is right here in the middle of this frame. We can all see it, right? It's right there in the middle. It's there. So that's a zoomed in photo of the same nest. You know, they're very, very difficult to see, and usually the zoomed out photo is what you're seeing when you're actually walking on the beaches. It's not exactly an easy task to monitor or to find nests, and then much less to collect data on them and then be able to re-find them the next time you came out when you know, driftwood has been blown over by sand. It really can be a very difficult task to do, especially with a volunteer base who some of them have been doing it for years and others are being trained each year.
Hey, Allison, this is Jessie. Can you make, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you make your screen bigger? It's not full screen.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, sorry, I chatted with you, but I don't think you saw it. I didn't want to interrupt.
I did not. No, thank you for doing that. Let me stop sharing and reshare.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, totally. Let's see.
Yeah, maybe show that nest one again so folks can get a better view.
Now it's not showing it properly. Of course, resume slideshow. Are you seeing it still just in the PowerPoint?
As we're seeing, it's can you go to from current slide? Click on
it. Try both of those. It's just not working. Let's see, from current slide.
Sometimes this unfortunately happens. I don't know why. I mean, that's better. It's bigger than the other screen. Yeah, so.
It is just interesting. It's just not. Yeah, how about still not working now? Well, I don't know. I guess we'll go with this. Can you see this a little bit bigger?
It is bigger. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry you're having problems.
That's okay. No, I don't know why. It's just, you know, sometimes you click on something and you're supposed to and it doesn't work. This might be as good as it gets in terms of how large it is. But yeah, so basically here's this nest. Here it is zoomed up close and here it is zoomed up super close right here. And, you know, we want to do all of this without harming the birds. So in order to do that, we have to have several requirements. We want people to do this safely and effectively. And so in order to do that, there's legal permits that we have to monitor endangered species. This is where we intersect a lot with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the work that Cheryl does as well. We want to have coordination and approval of each volunteer to monitor. So we want to make sure they're adequately trained in order not to cause any undue disturbance, in order to do this safely and effectively. And we do that both with Oregon State Parks and Recreation as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So because of all this, as you might imagine, we have pretty intensive volunteer training as well as constant in-season communication. So we all want to know, everyone mutually wants to know what's going on at each nest, when the last time it's been out there, and if it needs to be monitored again that week, or for example. So the intensive volunteer training I'm talking about requires a 3-hour virtual/classroom training and an initial field training where you get to learn about everything, all about plovers, a lot of things we've learned tonight. And then learn that in the classroom as well as how to monitor plovers. And then we want to take people out for an initial field training where you get to see what it's like on the ground, kind of decide whether or not this is something you want to be involved in. If it is something that people want to be involved in, we want to place them into a track to either do nest monitoring, which again requires that intensive permit, or if they're just interested in going out and counting plovers, recording bands, seeing what's out there on the wet sand, so they're staying on wet sand and not creating additional disturbance, then we have wet sand volunteers as well. So there's two kind of different tracks depending on interest and availability as well. If we do have nest monitor volunteers, we pair them with experienced volunteers for this first season. And the nest monitors are placed on a federal endangered species permit. So they're all permitted and trained in order to go out onto these plover beaches and essentially violating these restrictions that are placed by the rest of the beach going public about plovers for the purpose of monitoring them. We have volunteers data collecting as well. So they're collecting important data. They're not just going out there and observing them. We're also submitting that data so we can all collect it. It can go to the management and store those population numbers. The bands go to Orbic, for example. So this volunteer data collection, we have an app for that. And we collect all the monitoring data in the field and we submit it on the same day. In a glance, we can kind of see what the status of each nest was each time. So on this particular screen, we have a nest that's incubating, a nest that was lost, and a nest that is brooding some chicks. So kind of the whole status of everything, and each person kind of sees that every time they go out in the field. In addition, they collect a lot of other really important data collection that may not be directly what's happening to each nest or what happened to it. But we also collect a lot of data that provides a snapshot or report view of management issues. And so we have collect, for example, the number of predators and the types that we see out there as well. So far in 2022, on just our North Coast sites, we've reported 324 observations of predators or predator activity in some way on our beaches, which is a lot, but really interesting information and potentially helpful for management action. We've also reported 155 reports of disturbances and rule violations. So these are things that are not directly related to the nest, but since we're out there, we can provide additional information that could be really beneficial to the management of plovers. This data collection app, incidentally, is also being used at some of the other organizations on the Oregon coast, like those nests down in Lincoln County as well, which allows us to kind of share data instantaneously and to be able to see each other's information and see how that tracked. So we've reported some of our banded birds that we've seen that were banded down on the south coast that then nested up on the north coast and maybe failed up there and then went down to the central coast. So we get to see all that in an instantaneous viewpoint, which is pretty cool. The story of our Plover Patrol program is a story of growth, much like the story of growth with the plovers themselves. So on the North Coast, the program has grown alongside the plovers each year. So we've been operating since 2018. And you can see from this bar chart here that the numbers have gone up substantially in all three metrics. So the number of volunteers we have, the number of surveys we've conducted, and the number of nests that we've recorded each year. And again, those are across all those North Coast sites. So we've monitored at 6 North Coast sites ultimately, and we've conducted almost 500 surveys. By tomorrow, that number will be 500 since 2018. A really important aspect of this program that's maybe not captured in our data yet is the number of outreach interactions. So the volunteers really provide an important presence out on the beaches. They field tons of questions from the beach going public about plovers, why this area is closed, why they can't bring dogs on the beach, why it's important, what matters, what are some of the things that they can do to help. And we kind of provide opportunities and information and talking points for them to be able to talk to the general public to hopefully create a whole core of people who care about plovers across the North Coast. We've also monitored in that time frame 124 nests, 44 of which have been this year alone. So it's a story of growth each year. There are a lot of advantages to this kind of unique volunteer model. There's very few programs like this in the country where volunteers are doing actual nest monitoring. with the plover program. So on the East Coast, you know, there's plover, snowy plover equivalents of the piping plovers. There's lots of intensive monitoring that goes on across all 3 of our coasts, as well as in the Great Lakes, on plovers in general in this country. And there's very, very, very few volunteer programs. I only know of like one other one. I'm sure there probably are a few others, but there's very few. So this is a really unique volunteer program. It's really great because volunteers are often local community members. Sometimes they come from Portland, particularly our wet sand volunteers. They might just be going out to the beach a few times a year, and in that time frame, they can submit important data for our program. But some of our more intensive nest monitors are usually local community members. So they can act as beach ambassadors, be out on the beaches, as well as try to create some broader understanding of issues across the coast. So once you get super involved in plovers, you start to see that it's just one thread in a model of lots of other coastal issues and conservation issues. And so they learn a lot more about conservation issues and get involved in some of our other Portland Audubon's other conservation work that we do on the coast as well, both with other beach nesting or shore nesting birds, as well as some of our conservation challenges and actions that we have through our organization. Those who make it through the intensive training are deeply passionate about the topic. And so, like I said, they become more involved in other related topics as well. Finally, this model allows far more coverage than maybe 1 or 2 staff people could do. So especially in a growing site where we don't quite know where the plovers are going to be year after year, it's not quite static or stable enough because it's just a newly colonized sites. It allows us to have more coverage and kind of be flexible and nimble about where we want to go next and what we need to do each time. And then finally, we can communicate instantaneous management needs to OPRD, so to the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. So, you know, not only do we tell them information about predators or about human disturbances, we can also say like, hey, by the way, the latest high tide swept out all of your signage. Can you please come up and do more? Or there's a dead marine mammal on the beach. Like, how can we get that reported? There's a lot of trash that's in the site that's attracting crows, and we have the beach rangers do it. So we're kind of the eyes on the ground on the beaches as well. So I think we provide a lot of really important functions out on our local beaches. And then finally, each year in the beginning, in about April, late March, early April, we do volunteer training. And so in this volunteer training, you learn all about how to get involved and what kinds of things we can do. So if you're interested in attending that training, I'll drop this link in the chat for our website. And on there, you can also find my email address right here. You can join our mailing list or sign up for our training next year so you can get involved and do some of this beach walking and fun chick watching on the beach yourselves. So yeah, thank you very much. And that's pretty much all I have. I'm happy to answer questions along with the rest of the crew.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I learned a lot tonight. One of the things that I really love, we have a few questions, but I just wanted to remark that the expanded, let's see, what was it? Something about that the adult survival contributes most to the population growth. That was big news. It's very interesting. We all love the chicks, and I know that they're important as well, but and we're always rooting for chicks, but that's very interesting, and it makes me wonder about other shore and seabirds as well. That was very interesting. A lot of great things to take away tonight. All right, so we have some questions in the Q&A, and then I got a text. So I'm going to read the text first. The question is, are there colors plovers see better or worse than others, and should that affect what watchers wear? This is a CoastWatch volunteer, also becoming an Audubon volunteer, who actually found a nest and has seen some chicks just in the last week. And she likes to be consistent so the birds can become accustomed to her. So do plovers see colors better than others? Does anyone want to take that, or do we know?
Go ahead, Eleanor.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it. How about that? Birds in general do see color better than we do usually. And my monitors tend to wear, beachy color clothing. It's sandy color, just trying to blend in a little bit. But also, the plovers are really paying attention, and they're going to see you coming from a long ways away, no matter what you wear.
Does anyone else want to contribute to that question?
I was just gonna say, I'll second that, and that I'm an extremely boring dresser because I wear like beachy colors and things that blend in really well, just on the hope that I can get the jump on plovers before they are super cued into me, but also so predators don't start cueing into me and noticing me as well. So I'm not sure if it actually does any difference, but I do the same thing.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, I know that this volunteer in particular has been wearing the same outfit every time that she goes out, and she feels that that's helping they're recognizing her. But all right, a question from Chris. She said she may have missed this, but what is the range of the snowy plovers? I can send you a map. There were a number of maps shared tonight, Chris. But she said sometimes she sees them feeding in the tide line, and she's in the Twin Rocks area, so near Rockaway. Are there some active nests there that we know about right now?
No, I don't believe they nest in that general area, but they will move around to forage, especially during the non-nesting season, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes the beaches are just too narrow, or there's too many people, or they don't choose to nest there for some reason we don't know about.
And in that site in particular, plovers are nesting just across the inlet, across Barview into Bay Ocean Spit, and they nest there in decent numbers. So it's not surprising that they might spot them nesting on the tide line.
Right.
Okay, cool. Let's see, another question. If the Oregon plover population is doing so well now, what are the main concerns now? What is the current focus of management to ensure their population has long-term success?
That feels like a Fish and Wildlife Service question. So, so plovers are considered a conservation reliant species, meaning that even though they are doing very well in Oregon, they still require some very active hands-on management because of their life history and the way they nest on the ground, and they're very susceptible to being stepped on by people or run over by vehicles. They're still going to require these beach closures to some extent. I also want to point out that even though they're doing really well in Oregon, they're not doing very well in much of the rest of their range. So we are sort of a source population now for Northern California as well as Southern Washington. But those sites, especially going south, are not doing nearly as well as the plovers in Oregon are doing. But this is sort of a long-term game for managing for plovers.
Thanks, Cheryl. So John is here, and he is with the Lincoln County folks. He said that he just wants to add that even on dog-friendly beaches not managed for plovers, Oregon Parks requires that dogs either be leashed or in the voice control of their owners, not only for the benefit of plovers, but for other shorebirds as well, including migrants, which might be in the midst of thousands of miles journey and with little energy to spare, having to flee from uncontrolled dogs. Thanks, John. Absolutely spot on. Another question. I've heard purple martins maybe can help with plover management. Tell me more. Does anyone want to say anything about purple martins and plover management?
Okay, so we do have a bit of an experimental observation going on in some of those Southern County sites where purple martin nest boxes have been put up adjacent to snowy plover nesting habitat. There is some evidence that purple martins will mob aerial predators. So if you have something like a northern harrier that comes in to hunt over a site, the purple martin adults may gather together and mob these harriers to get them out of the way. They're protecting their own nest sites. So it's an interesting experiment. The jury's still out, and we're still collecting data to see how effective this really is. But it's a super interesting idea.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your question. That's a great question. All right. Well, it is 7:09. Those were great questions. It doesn't look like we have any new ones. I think I got everything, and I wanted to make sure that there aren't any hands raised with our participants here, the attendees that are here. It doesn't look like any raised hands. So thanks, everyone. Thanks very much. This has been recorded and will be available on our the CoastWatch YouTube channel. We have a CoastWatch YouTube channel, and we also have an Oregon Shores YouTube channel with many of our lectures and panels and educational sessions that we've had over the last couple of years, and we'll continue to have, but hopefully we can do this next time in person. But it is nice to have everyone come from all over the coast, from the south to the north. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope that you can all enjoy your evening. Looks like we might have one more question that came in. Did we? Just a thanks. Thank you. Thanks for being here, everyone, and have a great time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.